Even now, many of the thousands of people building Mosquitos must wonder why this aircraft is made of wood and how the wood construction is standing up in service. For 22 years, the parent company of the Mosquito have led the development of wooden aeroplanes, mainly because wood construction suited our limited markets, and for 22 years we've been justifying wood in publicity and sales efforts. Never, however, have we subjected our faith to such a test as in the present war, when we've designed a front-line aircraft of novel tactical purpose and outstanding speed and performance, and are building it in wood while every other modern operational aircraft is of metal. We chose wood for the Mosquito for 3 reasons. First, to tap a further source of raw materials. Secondly, to tap another labour group. And thirdly, to get more quickly through the prototype stage and into production. The Mosquito has been in operation over enemy territory for much longer than most people think, and we are at the stage now where we have some useful experience of how its structure is standing up. It is a good thing for those who make Mosquitoes to know something about these interesting facts. The weathering, fighting and crash landing qualities should be considered separately. The engineers responsible for the Mosquito have plenty of experience of the weathering resistance of its particular form of fuselage and wing structure from aircraft of 5 or 6 years ago which are still operating today. It is well established that given proper waterproofing, ventilation and drainage to prevent waterlogging, wooden aeroplanes will, with ordinary maintenance, last anything from 10 to 15 years. Practically all the Mosquitoes in R.A.F. service are dispersed in the open continuously, and the only trouble we have ever heard of in the squadrons has been in isolated instances where there was careless application of the protective treatment during manufacture. The Mosquito should withstand weathering effects for many years, though of course being war aircraft, the Mosquitoes are more likely to have a short life and a violent end. Now as regards the fighting qualities. Please correct the illogical person who thinks that a wooden aeroplane cannot be so strong as a metal one. The designer calls for certain strength factors and gets them. A wing with a factor of 10 will carry 10 times its designed load, whether made of metal or of wood. If made of wood, its scantlings, being of a weaker material, will simply be bigger. There will be more material and less airspace within the fuselage, wing, etc. In war, that is a favourable feature, because a bullet hole obviously represents a smaller percentage of the mass of the member it pierces. The stressed skin principle of construction, employed in the Mosquito fuselage and wing, exploits this advantage fully. For example, whereas a bullet or shell fragment might completely sever a small, strong metal member, like the tubular longeron of a welded metal fuselage, it would scarcely weaken the thick, continuous stressed skin of the Mosquito. But the proof of the ply is in the hitting. What has actual experience shown? During this year, Mosquitoes have been shot about a tremendous amount from aircraft machine guns and cannon, and from anti-aircraft guns. Bullet holes are usually clean and small, whereas in metal skin structures they are often splayed and jagged, due to the way sheet metal will distort on impact before fracturing. These small holes are very easily repaired. Obviously patching is much less of a job than in a riveted metal structure. Cannon fire, bullet or shell, is much more destructive. As you know, it is effective against locomotives and shipping and even light tanks. But experience to date does not suggest that the Mosquito structure suffers more seriously from cannon fire than metal aircraft do. In one case, a shell believed to be a 40mm size from a ground gun burst inside a Mosquito fuselage near the tail without disastrous results. German metal-built bombers usually disintegrate under our 20mm cannon fire. The other big risk in the air is the fire risk. In this regard, there is not much to choose between wood and metal aircraft. Petrol is the first thing to ignite in 90% of fires, and it is so highly inflammable, and there is so much of it, that fatal destruction nearly always follows. Aluminium sheets and even extruded spars melt and burn in a petrol blaze. The usual fire extinguisher arrangements can be made in the engine nacelles of a wooden aircraft just as they can in a metal aircraft. Now we come to crash landings, which constitute a separate and considerable cause of damage to war aircraft. Perhaps the first question here is, what are the landing characteristics with chassis retracted? There have been several instances of Mosquito's landing with the chassis retraction gear so damaged by gunfire that it couldn't be used. The Mosquito, with its middle wing position, lands steadily on its fuselage and comes to rest without severe shock. That is, of course, if it is landing on an aerodrome or a large field. The duralumin blades of its propellers are a comfort to the crew in this emergency because the blade tips bend under when they strike the ground and act as skis, carrying much of the weight of the engines and airframe, and so localizing the damage, usually to the front cover of the engines, whereas the engines might otherwise be torn out at the roots, or at any rate badly damaged underneath. Practically every other kind of crash landing has been made in Mosquitos now. As the result of gunfire, many Mosquitos have had to land with no wheel brakes. Touching down at 100 miles an hour or so, sometimes in darkness, any aircraft that is without brakes is liable to overrun the aerodrome boundaries, and often with catastrophic results. In landings of this kind, the Mosquito has shown up quite well. In one case, landing like this was made after dark, and the aircraft tore through a low hedge and a wire fence, straight across a boulder-strewn patch of about 50 yards wide, and up a steep bank several feet high before coming to rest on fairly level ground. The shocks to the airframe, not to mention the crew, were violent, and their effect may be considered sound evidence. All that was damaged was the main hinge bolt at the bottom of the tail wheel shock absorber, which was bent, causing the tail wheel to need extra pressure to get it off the lock. This particular landing pleased the pilots of the squadron very much indeed, and they wrote a congratulatory letter to the Mosquito designers. Still more severe crashes, diving into the ground, cartwheeling and the like, are usually calamitous in any case, no matter what an aircraft is made of. An important point in connection with the damage done in crashes is whether the wings and fuselage are difficult to repair. Repairs to the fuselage shell of the Mosquito do not call for high skill. Repairs to the wing call for a fair amount of woodworking skill, but recently a much simplified form of wing repair has been introduced, which can be done by woodworkers of very ordinary experience. There have been several cases of Mosquitos coming down in the sea, and here obviously the wooden structure shows up to great advantage by reason of its natural buoyancy. Metal aircraft, both fighters and bombers, seldom float for more than a few minutes, whereas Mosquitos have been known to float for many hours, serving as a raft for their crew if for any reason they should be unable to make use of their rubber dinghy. This is a really important feature and one which operational crews are very thankful for. As mentioned in a previous talk, there was an article in the March issue of the American magazine Fortune which was amusing to us people. It was entitled Plywood, Flies and Fights, and after drawing attention to the shortage of aluminium, announced that it was possible to build aircraft of plywood, the material used for chicken coops and kitchen cabinets. The plywood airplane is not a dream, this article said. Funny, because when an R.A.F. friend of mine first went on to Mosquitos and I asked how he liked the type, he said, "It's a dream."